When thinking about a recent historical event that has shaped the current research being conducted on industrial and organizational psychology, I believe that Jex and Britt do the best in explaining particular events in the recent past that have ultimately shaped the field. One of their best examples, from my opinion, is the research has been conducted since the tragedies of 9/11. How employees and organizations interface and what those new role descriptors are, as well as examining the dichotomy that existed previously with discrimination in regards to how people have upward mobility within inside an organization. Now we see that regardless of your origin, your background, your ethnicity, sexual orientation, that upward mobility is something that can be not only attained but is possible for all individuals. Particularly in that example following 9/11, they used military structures and other organizations as very good archetypes for these role models for industry. And with that, I think we see just a resurgence of the contract that exists between employees and organizations, and reevaluating those terms, what it specifically means to be an employee within an organization and how the organization values that employee. In our current times, it's no longer a labor for work and that's just what you do type of organization or entity. Now people are valuing the benefits packages. They're seeing that there's a plethora of work available to them in their skill sets, and they're more apt to bounce from position to position if the organization is not treating them, quote unquote, as they deem fair or fit. So, with the resurgence of reevaluating the roles of the employee in a modern context, and also the upward mobility that is now able to be obtained by any and all employees, it's a vastly different marketplace. You're looking at different types of employees with different mindsets than you did pre 9/11. Even though that there's been a lot of growth in research in the field for the last 100 years, I believe that it has definitely changed in its scope recently and in light of all of these recent events. Again, hitting on 9/11, with that, you just see so many different organizational structures either break down or become re-examined in light of all the tragedies that happen. And with that, we see better quality of work for workers, better contracts available with benefits packages, organizations now, because of unions and because of the workforce in general, having to value their employees in a different way, which ultimately creates a better industrial and organizational environment for all parties involved in this employee contract. When speaking about the electronic environment, particularly for graduate students or even those that work in small teams for multi-million-dollar companies, there's a lot of hurdles that need to be addressed. In the particular scenario that's given here is whether socialization takes place for my particular graduate program in industrial and organizational psychology. I would say that it does through a small onboarding process, but the continued socialization aspect is very hollow. And I believe in the academic sphere, you have to have that in some capacity because it can't be driven towards motivating employees, if you will, to maintain their relationships and grow in connectedness throughout their tenure at an organization. That can't be directly translated over to academia. So you end up with a very interesting scenario where you have a very short amount of time to socialize employees or students and to get them to foster relationships inside of their own individual teams. However, once these teams are disbanded or the semester ends, what you end up with is a bunch of individuals that pursue different things and different career paths and potentially different classes throughout the remainder of their graduate program. So, speaking specifically about Liberty in general, I would say that it does a better job than most of the other institutions that I've been a part of. But socialization, as I said before, is a very difficult process to handle in an electronic environment, particularly when the time constraints are very short for the tenure of the individuals that are involved. So, a couple of recommendations that could be seen through this process, what I've learned so far, is maybe having a different graded or weighted scheme, saying that those that come up with more ideas in group discussions garner more points than those that just post the bare minimum to get by and what the assignments would be. How that would relate possibly is you come up with an initial discussion item, and those that foster the most growth, whether it's done by word count or by actual postings, those individuals have what you would say the top of the bell curve versus the rest of them that just post 150 words and never reply back to their classmates. Because what this does is it creates an environment where those that normally would push themselves to excel see that everyone else is just getting by with the bare minimum. And in that, you don't have that I would say, an organizational citizenship behavior, because everyone sees, well, if everyone just gets pushed through with the bare minimum work, what is there an incentive to do more, to do greater? And I believe that this could carry on into their job embeddedness later down the line. So it needs to be addressed. I do think that there's a good onboarding process, but it could definitely be improved. When speaking about organizational work-family conflict and the dichotomy between organizations trying to maximize employee potential along with the different benefits that they offer, it's a very complicated scenario, but in that there's definitely some tools that they can use to reduce that. I think primarily they need to realize organizationally that they need to realize that their employees do have lives outside of work. I know that from a managerial perspective, particularly in the United States Army, it's very easy to get caught up in the idea that the Army is the end-all and be-all, particularly when your life is on the line, you're in a deployed environment like I am right now. It's very easy to forget about family, and as harsh of a reality as that is, sometimes that is the difference between life or death. However, in organizations back in the United States where they have a great amount of freedom and your life is not in danger, I think it would benefit organizations dramatically to recognize the impact that the family has on their organizational workforce. So in that, I believe that just a simple recognition that there is a family in addition to work, or primarily before work, is definitely a discussion that needs to be had and reevaluated with a lot of different organizations. Also, I think that we'll see, as a shift of that organizational behavior, that if we truly start to value the family piece and aspect of the employees, that you'll actually get a greater sense of motivation out of the employee. I know that from a very small unit leadership scale in the United States Army, when I take care of my soldiers and when I value their individual lives and their families, that they're much more likely to sacrifice what they have, whether it's literally the smallest of things to the greatest of things, to ensure that not only the mission gets completed, but that the things that I'm asking them to do are required. They excel at them and they want to succeed, and it's not because that they ultimately believe in everything that the organization believes in, but from a managerial position, what you have is a connectedness that you would not otherwise have. So recognizing the family component inside of the industry is ultimately going to make the industry stronger. It may seem counterintuitive to give your employees time off to go and spend with their families, but at the end of the day, you end up with a employee that has a connectedness and a nested interest in their organization because their organization cares for them. So that is just one of the many ways that an organization can deal with work-family conflict, and also to improve their organization as a whole, is not only recognition but seeking to improve the quality of their family life in addition to their employee duties. When being tasked with creating a comprehensive performance-based assessment system for your employees, first of all, you need to recognize the magnitude of what you're trying to do, and then also relate that to the individual organization that your business prescribes to. It's completely different for an industrial organization that is responsible for creating goods and actually manufacturing things versus service-related fields. So one of the ways to evaluate employee-based performance is to use Murphy's model of job performance, particularly as it relates to in-role and extra-role distinctions. So one of the primary motivating factors that employees have coming to an organization is to be good at their tasks, which is a specified task within their occupation. We would label this as a in-role behavior, particularly a task-oriented behavior, which is being able to perform your major task-associated jobs. So along with that, along with creating measures to adequately measure how an employee is good at their job. Say if they're going to make or maintain particular coding instruments for website building. How many per hour can they do? What is the quality of such work? And how do you find a way to measure both of these on a scale against other employees? And an additional way that you would measure an employee's performance is in relation to extra role performance, which is how they interact with other employees. What do they do in their downtime at work? And then also an evaluation of destructive or hazardous behaviors, those things that are safety violations or sabotage or just accidents, things that Murphy describes as incidents that do not promote organizational citizenship behaviors. So in this, when you develop a comprehensive package for the employee to measure them against and rank them against other employees, what you have is multiple factors that you have to not only evaluate them, but then also find a baseline for minimum and maximum levels of performance, which are going to rank them in that order. So possibly, I think the most important and critical piece to any organization is that your employees be able to do what they're tasked to do. So primarily, you would find a way to see how employees do at their primary job function. In addition to that, you would also create a measure of how employees interact with other employees, whether these socialization behaviors are positive or negative, and then evaluate them in a ranking system against their peers and counterparts. With this, you have a comprehensive system that evaluates not only how productive they are and how efficient they are, but also how well they know their job, which is their primary occupation as an employee at your organization. When examining organizational constraints and how that plays to employee behavior, whether it's productive or counterproductive, there are a few measures that strike me as the most prominent. Being a part of the United States Army, an organization that is founded on discipline, rules, and regulations, I think that oftentimes you see some counterproductive employee behavior as a result of an effort to control the soldiers or to enforce good standards and discipline. This can be seen in a variety of different situations where the soldier's time is not only wasted on different tasks that may not necessarily need to be completed, but some things are not communicated in a way that the soldiers understand the gravity of what they're doing or the end state. So in addition to the other things that have been brought up in our text by Jackson Britt, such as poor equipment or just manning unnecessary rules and regulations and just simply wasting employees' time, I think, as I previously stated, one of the largest things is literally just the unnecessary rules and regulations that plague our organizational workforce today. I understand we have a need in the civilian side for organizations such as OSHA and other organizational bodies that govern how we safely enact and govern ourselves in business. However, oftentimes the employees don't understand down to the intricate levels of why these things exist and how they interface with their own professions. So drawing from examples from the Army, again, is I can think of countless examples of when soldiers weren't completely explained the entire situation, or they did not have the time, and at the end of the day, these counterproductive behaviors begin to set in, whether it's theft of the smallest things, pens, pencils, pads of paper, up to weapon systems. These things do take place because of a degradation of morale and self-discipline and ultimately just good order within the ranks of the Army itself. So I think we could go a long way in taking the organizational advantages we have, being able to communicate effectively with our subordinates and peers and superiors, and ensure that everyone has what we call in the Army a common operating picture. Not only do they have the task that they are to complete, but why they are to complete it. And whenever you give your employees, whether they're soldiers or civilians, the reason why, oftentimes what you see is an ownership of the problem and not a counterproductive behavior of saying, hey, you're just wasting my time on something that's unnecessary, but they have a full grasp of what's going on. When you have that connectedness, you also have an increase in morale and a self-importance within the entire equation.